Audio blocks, story blocks, they have that whole section with video. A majority of it came from there. I think I ended up pulling maybe one video from Pexel, is
Okay.
another like free site out there.
Okay.
But
Because
that's
I was
where I
wondering,
gathered it.
oh, sorry, say that again.
I said that's where I gathered it. What were you saying?
Oh, I was just gonna say, because this is obviously that this is set in like rural Illinois,
Mhm.
right? And there's a very sort of like and you are like a writer of like the Southern Illinois Gothic kind of genre. Like you kind of capture the milieu around here, which is its very own atmosphere. It's like very unusual, but it's very cool, and it lends itself to this kind of like true crime feel.
Mhm.
Um, and I was really impressed in those trailers how you were able to use that footage, which could come across like is generic in a sense, right? To communicate that kind of environment. I'm wondering what kind of choices did you make when you were thinking about your book and when you were thinking about the environment and the setting your book takes place in, as you were sort of like picking those clips for this.
Originally, whenever I made this stuff, I really wanted to go home and do a lot of filming, but unfortunately,
Yeah.
since I was recovering from COVID, like that just wasn't a possibility for me. I was too sick to make it back home and do this. But so much of like capturing all of like the Southern Illinois, everything just relies on like aesthetics. So I
Right.
just searched through all of these clips and I just tried to find things that aesthetically matched, the things that I recognize, the things in my book. I really love things with that like golden kind of hue to them, because that is just like so indicative of like what it's like around here throughout the day. The way that the sun settles over things, but I mean, like I could see a clip and I could know instantly like those aren't our trees, that's not what our trees look like, that's not what our roads look like, those aren't our buildings look like this. And almost every time I would click on a piece of footage and it would be like, this is from Indiana or this is from rural Ohio. And I'd be like, yep, I've got the general area. I know what this area looks like. So
Yeah, that's awesome. Can I ask the limited series question?
mhm.
Yeah,
Curious.
please. No, that's because that's an exciting prospect. That's such
That's
a,
a really,
and
yeah,
it's not unlikely, right? Like, I mean,
right.
that kind of thing used to be just like, oh yeah, pie in the sky, but they are actively looking for this kind of material by a writer like Liz to make into television shows. Like,
Yeah.
it's a great time for that. So
IP is hot. Basically, when you publish your book and the announcement goes at, scouts will start looking for it, like looking through the publishers marketplace thing, and they'll say like, "Oh, do you represent?" Talk to the agent. Do you represent, Nobody Girl? Do you represent like, or sorry, it wasn't Nobody Girl, Nowhere Girl. I'm sorry, Nobody Girl.
nobody
Yeah.
grew.
Do
Yeah.
you represent Nobody Girl? Oh, I saw that just sold. Can I see the manuscript? And then they'll ask for your manuscript and they'll look it over and they'll, you know what I mean? So it's really exciting. I'm wondering, Liz, what limited series are, influences on you, right? And what limited series have you watched that you think are loyal adaptations or innovative adaptations of the novels they're based on?
Whenever I was writing Nobody Girl, I watched Sharp Objects on a loop
Oh yeah.
over
Yeah.
and
No,
over
that's
and over.
yeah.
When I would finish it, I would start it again. I would play it in the background whenever I was writing because it had the vibe I was looking for, it had the music I was looking for. And I've read the novel too multiple times, just the way that they took things out and they expanded the right things, like the things that they took and the things that they changed were the things that they should have took and changed and expanded, in a way that I think like Gone Girl and stuff like that, they took things in different directions and they left things out that they shouldn't have left out. I think Sharp Objects, they did it in a
No,
really
that's
really
about
strong
as
way.
good as I'd have been shocked if that hadn't been the first place you went with that question, because it's Sharp Objects is about as well done as it could be done, I think. And I listened to the soundtrack, I mean, I got it, I just download, got it on, Apple Music, and it's really smart, the people they picked and the versions of songs they picked, and stuff like that. And I agree that it's regionally you know, regionally smart influence. So yeah, I'm excited to hear that.
And that's your genre, Liz, right? Like that same sort of like suspense thriller kind of crime genre.
Mhm.
You know, you say, and so I think that's a really apt comparison. And I think you can actually start writing with a mind towards adaptation, which is something you're clearly doing, right? You have the aesthetic sense, you have the sense of the setting, right? And you have this sort of brisk plot. The novel is peopled with these like really interesting, I mean, you got someone named Corn Dog, you know what I mean? Like you got like a wide kind of exciting array of characters here. It lends itself to a limited series. Do you know what I mean? And that's what you can do. And in fact, what I believe you should do is start as you're writing, think of how this is going to look on screen.
Right.
Right?
Well, and that's and the next stage I would suggest is to put together your pitch deck, right? And you know the videos can be part of that, but let's talk about pitch decks and stuff like that. But have you seen the it's called Montauk, Montauk, but it's the pitch deck for what became Stranger Things. And it's freely available. But it's kind of the gold standard of how you pitch a television show now. And I can also share with you the pitch deck that Josh Woods made for Black Palace. And they're just beautifully done. They're really smart representations, and they're visual. They tend to be visual. They tend not to be very heavy on text. They're very heavy on visuals. And of course, you know, you can have links to music and videos and stuff like that as well. But yeah, I think the pitch deck is kind of the next stage for this novel. I mean, I'd be interested to hear what other folks think. But I mean, my feeling about the manuscript is it's very close to being ready to go out. Like, I don't, I think you could hit agents with it very much in the form it's in now.
Patrick, I'm sorry, go ahead. I've spoken enough. Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I just wanted to say quickly about setting. I in the comments I sent you, Liz, I actually think that you could do a little bit more with setting. You have such a brilliant. There are some descriptions in this manuscript that I just think are over the moon good. I mean the bone the bone graveyard or the bone orchard. I mean that is just absolutely an outstanding moment. I I I would have liked to have seen you turn that really keen eye for description to the landscape a little bit more, because I do have some sense of a little bit of where the creek is and Ridgewood Road. I have in my head so a geographic location of where the houses are. But like, for example, the way the hills move, or what you were just saying about, you were saying those aren't our trees. And I know those aren't our trees for this specific reason. I would have liked a little bit more of that sort of fleshing out of the landscape, just because I think that you're so good at describing characters and how they look. I would have liked that turned a little bit more to the landscape itself. And the thing that kept coming back to me, the example, was for some reason I kept thinking of Salem's Lot and the opening of Salem's Lot and how Stephen King describes the main character traveling along a highway and then turning off an exit and going to Jerusalem's Lot. And there's just such a strong sense of place and you really get a feel for how things smell. And I mean, I've never been to Maine, but I felt like I had after those passages in Salem's Lot. So I guess I would have liked a little bit more of that. And as I said, it's really more because I think I would have been so blown away at what you would have come up with in terms of describing a little bit more of the landscape itself. So, and just wanted to add that because we're talking about setting in general.
Absolutely.
That's
Yeah.
a comment that I did give a lot of thought whenever I read it. And I think I realized that, and RA and Pinckney, they've both read a lot of my writing, and I spend a lot of time in this aesthetic, in this Midwestern kind of setting. And I put it in so much of my stuff that it pervades kind of my stuff, that if I write something where it's a little bit weaker, it may be in so much of my other stuff that it flies under the radar in that piece because it's everywhere else.
Right. I may be, yeah, I may be imputing it from the sort of background work, you know, your backlist of stuff. So I think that's really worth noting for somebody who's coming to your work fresh.
Yeah,
Yes.
and just one final thing, I guess the thing that maybe the question to ask yourself is rural Southern Illinois, how is rural Southern Illinois different from rural West Virginia or rural Alabama? What makes it, because you do use that concept of Southern Illinois in the novel at certain times, and that concept I think could have just been elaborated on. And it just, I, I would love to see what you would do with it because I think you would do absolutely astounding things with it. So maybe just ask yourself that question. What is different about rural Southern Illinois versus rural Indiana or another comparison? So
It's the South and the North. That's the best explanation I got. It's the most South the North can get. But yeah, I'll do some thinking on that because I know how it differentiates from Central Illinois and especially Northern Illinois. But how it differentiates from other rural areas, I'll sit with because Southern Illinois has like too much pride in being Southern Illinois and not being like other rural peoples. I don't know why we differentiate ourselves like that, but we do.
Liz, I have a practical question.
Of course.
So, okay, so basically, like in the industry, agents like to receive manuscripts that are around 90 to 95K word count. This is over 108, this is 108,000 roughly. As I was reading this, I totally agree with Patrick. Like there is gorgeous stuff in here. And I've always noted this about your writing, right? Where, you know, you're a very atmospheric writer, but you're also sort of, you write at like a brisk pace and a very engaging pace, which is why this comment may come as like off as a little bit, you know, unexpected, but what fat could you see trimming from this manuscript? If you were to prepare this to submit to an agent, you would realistically, you'd have to make it shorter. Like it's unlikely that you could submit it in this exact shape. You'd have
So
to
pull it down by 15,000 words.
Yeah, pull it down by 15,000.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say. And so you would have to make some cuts. Where do you feel you could cut, or where do you feel you could keep it brisk but also kind of more concise?
My initial goal was 80K whenever I was writing it, and I
I
looked at a
remember we
lot of
talked about that number early on.
80K was what I was trying to hit. And as I started climbing toward that number and it didn't feel like the story was over, I started looking at other crime novels and looking up their word counts to see if like conceivably I was going to still be in the right range. It was still running longer than I wanted to. So I started cutting chapters. I started cutting storylines. There are several chapters that are missing. There are chapters that were completely overhauled to get rid of lots of information. Lots of things about the death business were completely cut out of the novel. I think the first thing that I would go after, I think something that's very weak in the novel that I definitely want to change, is that I think a lot of the interactions between Sally and Teddy are very redundant, and I think a lot of them can be condensed and they can be sharper. So I definitely think that would take the word count way down, as if I could find a way to combine a lot of those interactions and make those interactions stronger. So that's something that I want to look at doing 100%. Is that the first thing I would target?
Awesome. Good to hear.
what would you think? Um, the I don't know how others will respond to this, but as I said in my comments to you, I really love the Pips and Billy storyline. That was absolutely my just such a favorite. And the writing there, as I said to you, it approached a kind of transcendence at moments. There was a religiosity to it, which was very fascinating to me. Very, very, very interesting, where you talk about Pips being a destruction to the land and a second coming, or a devastation to the land. I mean, it was just really, really fascinating. And I guess I love that part of the story so much that, and there were other storylines like, with Gretchen. I didn't. There were some funny moments with her, but I could have seen her cut. Um, but I suppose what I'm wondering is, what if you thought of, or just as a thought exercise, what if they were your main characters, Billy and Pips? And I mean main characters in the sense that you were sort of fashioning the story around them, so that it didn't have quite the same episodic quality. I mean, any thoughts about that? I'm not suggesting that you do that. It's just I'm kind of piggybacking off of Frumkin's comment about um, thinking about ways to reshape the novel, possibly cutting some things out. I mean, any thoughts about that?
In a lot of ways, they did kind of become the main characters to me. In the original like inception of the novel, it was supposed to be more episodic. They were only supposed to show up like 5 or 6 times, like total. But as I started writing it, they took the steering wheel out of my hands and they told me that they were going to be the main characters to the novel. And I quickly realized that it was a smart decision because they were really the only like through line. They were the only thing tying a lot of these other episodes together and making sense of a lot of the other things that were happening. Because a lot of these other things is just things happening in other places, and you're left to make sense of them until you have somebody like Pips and Billy who are seeking answers and trying to put that kind of stuff together. Um, so I can absolutely see room to continue to bring them even more to the forefront, because that's what the novel wanted to begin with, and that's what it was fighting for when I was writing it. So I think right now they comprise like 33% of the novel, and I can see that number going up absolutely, because I love them so much, and it's probably really obvious that I like them a lot.
Well, you could put them up, push them up to 50%.
Just really wants the book to
Okay,
be
so
Pips
it's going
and
to
Billy.
be 85,000 words long. 47,000 of those words should be Billy and Pips. No, but I mean, I love the fact that and this is more and more the way our thesis defenses work, that we can talk in these very practical ways, right? About number of words and how the book concentrates and those sorts of things, right? I mean, these are real writerly concerns. Yeah, this is not, some sellout way to talk about books, or right. This is really how the business works. And I love hearing those, because these are the ways, these are the way writers talk to each other, right? And so I think that's these are very cool critiques to hear.
Well, the other thing, and I'm sorry, I'm like
No,
you
no,
two
no, this is very
here, I'm
useful.
talking way too much. And I'm Professor. If Professor Frumkin had something to say, I apologize. I don't mean, okay.
We got
Um,
plenty of time for everybody, Patrick.
I
Don't
just loved
worry
them
a bit.
so much. I just loved Billy and Pips, and I wanted to know more about them. And I know I said this to you, and when I wrote about they met Copperhead, but I want to hear what their first conversation was like. They were such a the other point that I made about them, and I think this is true. They're the sort of goodness and decency in the novel. And there were moments when I wanted somebody to be a good human being, because it's so full of all these dreadful, awful people. And then you have Pips, and then you have Billy, who's kind of complicated in her way, but I think her love for Pips is I think that there's a decency and really goodness there. But that would be my other pitch for enlarging them a little bit, because they would just give you a great counterbalance in their goodness. And I don't mean that's not the right word. That sounds like a kind of a, a cloying, I don't mean mawkishly good. I just mean in the sense that they are a counterbalance to everybody else in the novel who is so venal and is so only concerned about their kid and making sure that their kid they're covering up for their children. That was the other thing about them that I just loved so much. That there was this in Pips. I think you could expand on some of her motivations too. That kind of the way that she's a tuning fork for the universe. I wanted to hear a little bit more about that. So I realize I'm saying expand and contract, and so this is probably not helpful advice, but that is one thing. I just found them so moving, and the writing was just, as I said to you, there were moments there where I had to pick my jaw up off the floor because the writing was so good, and it was always good, but with them it was just, as I said, the only word that I can think of is it was just transcendent at moments.
I appreciate that. And there was a lot more background information on them and one draft, and then it's gone through like 50 drafts. And this was earlier to the beginning that there was more background information on them. But I found that it was falling toward the middle, and the middle was getting really, really soggy with all of this background information, and the plot was dragging really, really bad. And I had to pick the pace back up. And so I had to bring more more action back into it, more twists back into it. And so a lot of that information accidentally got cut as a result, because these chapters were just dragging really, really bad. And I never found a way to build some of that information back into the book in a spot that wasn't going to make it drag really, really bad. Because I was very, very concerned about pacing, especially in the middle of the novel, because that's like the danger zone is right there in the middle, and that's where it was all falling.
Yep.
Yeah.
No,
So
good. I mean, and these are the right concentrations. Like, I pray everybody in the MFA, is watching this defense and just heard what you said about the middle of the novel, right? Because that's where novels, and particularly, novels in people's early careers, but later too, that's where they fall apart, right? Is you get a great beginning, great ending, and then there's this whole middle where nothing's changing, nothing's moving, and you're just sort of temporizing till you can get to the climax. And not you, but I mean, one. And so that's a really smart place to be paying attention to your pacing. Yeah.
Just to add to that, and this is a critique I got from my second novel, which is a heist novel, right? So it's not wildly, in terms of like crime and different genres, like it's not wildly different. I was told that I need to sort of maintain suspense, right? And that in particular, particularly in the middle of the novel, right, where things were working out too well. It's about con men. Things were working out too well for the con men, right? They were pulling off every single con. Things were going very well, right? And so that's what I wanted to ask you, Liz. Like, you do this. You keep us on the edge of our seats, right? And I want you, for the benefit of the other MFA students here, I want you to talk a little bit more about how you maintain suspense throughout the novel, right? And you keep us going at that brisk pace. Because I think suspense is, just like, to kind of quickly give my rough definition of it, suspense is when the reader thinks things might not work out, right? When the reader thinks things might not work out for the people they care about, right? So, and you have that in here, right? You have us thinking like, oh my God, what's going to happen, right? And things have already, the book opens with things like really not having worked out at all very well for anyone, right? So can you talk a little bit more about maintaining suspense throughout this novel?
So I really looked back at the first class that I had in grad school with you, Pinckney, whenever we were writing those 1,000-word scenes, and really got to thinking about writing in like these small 1,000-word chunks. and really thinking about modulation, like really hard, making sure that you're just going from one thing to another thing. And I wanted to write a novel in scenes. So I didn't want to write like this thing that's like dragging out for long periods of time. I wanted to write something you get in and you get out. So if I have to drop you in the middle of something and yank you out, like right as something ends, that's what I'm going to do. And the second the modulation starts to happen, I've accomplished what I want to do. But sometimes I would write something really long and I would figure out like what the most interesting section of that was, and I would get rid of everything around it. Or there are parts like a lockpick and escape are 2 chapters that were originally 1 chapter. It's whenever Pips breaks into the Lowell's house. Whenever the Terran pulls into the driveway, originally it just kept going. And then I thought to myself, like, it's just way more interesting if somebody pulls into the driveway and I just cut the cameras and we come back later. So there are times that I would just keep writing and I would come back later and be like, it's way more interesting to cut the cameras here and to move on. And you just wonder what happens. So I kind of put myself in the reader's shoes for a second of like, what would make me want to flip to the next page in this case? Because I have a very limited attention span. I am bored very, very easily. And so I had to take that into consideration. It's like, what would make me bored in this moment? Would I be bored if this kept going? And if the answer was yes, it's like, all right, then we need to cut sooner.
Right. And I love the way you're saying, you're already thinking of this in terms of the limited series, because you're saying when the camera cuts, right? And you're shifting focus immediately. And that's how TV episodes work, right? Taryn pulling into the driveway, cut. We don't need to see what happens after that because I want to see that in the next episode. You know what I mean? So like, I love so much that you're already thinking like that. And I love that you do drop us in media res in a lot of cases, right? Where having to find our bearings is so much more interesting than having that expositional setup where it's like, okay, this and this and these and these and this is da, da, da. The fact that you are writing in scenes, I think, goes a long way, right, for this piece.
Yeah, I think that's probably the thing I'm most proud of with this. And the way that I trimmed off a lot of the fat was getting rid of a lot of the exposition and a lot of the unnecessary endings of chapters that didn't need to be there.
But it's hard, right? I mean, it's easy as a reader, or easier anyway, as a reader to see, oh, this person's going on and on a little bit, right? Than to, your own words. You, as much as any student I can think of that I've had, are very good at not being precious about your own writing.
I will kill all my darlings.
Yeah, you say that with a little too much relish.
You really did.
Can we get you to read to us a little bit, Liz? Do you mind reading for us? Is that because we've all read the novel, but I would like for folks who are watching and listening to get a sense of the prose that we're talking about here. And if it's all right with you, I'll just spotlight you. And there you go.
So I grabbed 3 sections of the novel this morning, unless people have, if you guys have a particular preference about what I read. But I grabbed the section where we meet Gretchen. I grabbed the fight between Piplo and Forth where they come to blows, and then I grabbed the section where where Pip sneaks onto the Woomer farm for the first time, as I think they're all particularly interesting.
I think if Patrick had his way, it would be on.
I was going to say, let's give Patrick his moment here.
I can tell you what I want you to read if you like.
Let's do the Pips. Yeah.
What was that?
Oh, what? You read whatever you like.
Let's hear the scene with Pips.
Okay, so I'll have Pips on the Wimmer farm. Let me get this arranged so that I can see you guys and see my screen. Alrighty, so this takes place in the middle of a chapter called Evidence, We are about 2/3 of the way through the book. To give a little bit of context, I know I haven't explained the book to anybody who's watching on Twitch, so they're just like, what the fuck is going on right now? At this point in the chapter, Pips has essentially confronted the Woomers in their driveway, and she's done this so that they will threaten to call the cops on her, and she leaves. And now they think that she's gone because they threatened her. Why would she come around? Why would she stick around? So she's using this opportunity to sneak right back onto their property. Pips hiked up Dogwood, slow and steady, sweating through her t-shirt. The air was thick wet today, the summer refusing to give way to any hint of fall. By the time she made it to the edge of the woods where the trees led up into the Woomer property, she was sweating into her own eyes. She knuckled the burn away with the collar of her t-shirt, then mopped her forehead. Pressing her Canon's viewfinder to her eyes, she flipped her camera on and pushed her sports lens to its limit to get a look at the Woomer's house and barns. No signs of life. She flipped her camera off, reslung it, and, with a wince, hopped the weedy ditch toward the barbed wire fence of the Woomer farm. There was a path flattened down between the pastures back she'd found a few days ago, hidden but wide enough for a small truck to drive down. She legged it at a crouch in the shadows close to the trees. There was no getting in the house, she knew, but the barns were fair game right now. She had to stop, not quite halfway down the pasture, to catch her breath and to let her thigh rest. The heat was a menace. Her head was pounding in her temples and ears. She coughed and spit out mucus, then cast her eyes around the ground she was standing on. It was turned over, no grass, all dirt around the pasture's fence and several feet out from it. She toed the ground. The dirt was dry but loose. It was staring at the fence that it clicked what was going on. The posts she was looking at were newer. They weren't as weathered, as discolored, and she could see where the barbed wire had been patched. They'd fixed some damage, she thought. Then, figuring it wouldn't hurt, she turned on her camera and took a photo. The repair seemed new enough Pips was surprised she hadn't seen it done. She was out here often enough. No, she stopped herself. No, she did remember this. Was it on this SD card? She clicked playback and navigated to the beginning of the photos on the card. Pictures of Jed Lowell walking into his office downtown. No, then, not this card. It would be the one at home, the 64 gig. The photo of Hank with the shovel was an early one from the first day. She flicked her camera off and eyed the Woomer's house again, no movement, then pushed over the dirt clods with her boot. Why had they dug up so much of the ground past the fence? That was the one thing not clicking in her head. She knocked a few more clumps of dirt around, ready to move on when something small and white caught her eye. She squatted and fished it out of the dirt, cleaning it with her thumb. It took a couple seconds before it registered what she was looking at, before a weird rock shifted to roots and enamel, and this is a tooth, a baby tooth. Hair raised across her scalp, noise rattling through her skin. God, she was holding one of Anna's teeth, a human tooth. Why was it here? And then, in a rush, she realized the photo of Hank with the shovel took on a whole new meaning. You goddamn bitch! Pips jumped, dropping the tooth. Hank was barreling toward her down the fence line. Give me that goddamn camera, he yelled. Pip's brain's function sputtered. A camera. She found a tooth. Why did he want her? And then her brain came back online and her muscles unlocked. Snatching her camera up in her hand, she turned and sprinted, but she had made it 15 steps before a blow barreled into her shoulder blades and sent her flying to the ground. Her face bashed off her cannon as she hit the dirt. Her upper lip went numb in an instant, then white hot, her head fuzzy. She felt a hand grab her calf, her shoulder, and she kicked out blindly until she hit something hard. Fuck! She scrabbled in the dirt and got to her feet, something snagging the back of her t-shirt, but she ran. Her head was a fog and her thigh was on fire, but she ran and ran and ran and ran.
Liz, I really love, again, I'm gonna go back and back and back to this, but I love the sort of like, the word I'm just gonna keep on using is cinematic, right? Because I just love the kind of viscerality of you know, the baby tooth, you know, and the introduction of Hank into the scene, right? So this is what I was saying. You create suspense. We don't know how things are going to end for Pips, right? Pips is piecing things together. We don't know how things are going to end for Pips in this moment, right? And that's exactly what makes us want to keep on reading, right? So it's like, you clearly you understand how TV works, clearly you understand how movies work. And I think obviously you should be commended for that, right? Because it's really cool stuff, it's really exciting stuff. This is what we want our graduates to be doing, right? This is what Pinckney and I really want, is for people to be going into TV too, and going into film. Like this is what the future, so it's exciting. I'm very happy about that.
No, I agree. It works. It just really works beautifully. Um, yeah. And I mean, the other thing I like about this novel as a novel from your generation, right? I mean, because you and I are in many ways, we're in some of the same area, right? That, what do you want to call it? Grit lit, I've heard it called, things like that. But that, this sort of rural, violence, crime, those sorts of things. But, one of the things you do very well, and this shouldn't be a surprise, but, is like you incorporate contemporary technology in without the sort of like horror movie convention. Oh, technology doesn't work here. You know what I mean? Like, oh, the iron in the hills blocks my cell phone. Like it's really, I mean, when she thinks about, oh, it's a 64 gig card that's at my house, right? That it's perfectly natural, right? It's that's a perfectly natural thought, and it's a thought that you might have or anybody would, right? But I've never written the words 64 gig card in my fiction in my life as a just as a function of all my fiction takes place in a kind of permanent 1974. So but
You should write a story called The SD Card.
Yeah, I mean, I need to catch up at some point, but yeah, all the cars in my work have carburetors, right? I'm the only person on this call who's ever seen or touched a carburetor. I feel confident, but anyway, I just think it's wonderful, like it, because it is, it feels like all those old ghosts and the bones that are buried in the earth, but but now your generation has to deal with them, and I like that. Like I just find that I find it thrilling. Like I find it thrilling that there is that there are those connections, but also those new things that you're doing, and that you do so organically. We haven't gotten you hooked up with the Noir at the Bar people in St. Louis or elsewhere, have we? Okay, well, we need to make that connection with Jedediah Ayers. Have you met Jed Ayers, or have we've not made that introduction? Okay, well, Sarah has read it, Noir at the Bar, and Sarah Gillick has had good success there, and we'll get you hooked up with them too, just because it's a really fun group. Like they're so fun to give readings for, because it's just a bunch of crime writers, right? And RA, if you want that hookup at some point, right, they're so cool. The readings are fun. People are having a good time. The writing tends to be really violent and weird. So we'll get you hooked up with those folks, because you're right in their wheelhouse.
I also I'm thinking about RA's comment regarding the cinematic quality of the writing, and I absolutely agree. The other thing that I like, though, about this scene in particular, what I liked, is that there's also a really neat visual thing that happens with the tooth that you do, where it's something like a rock, and then there's a dash, and then it becomes a root, and then there's a dash, and then it becomes something else. I thought that transformation was visually quite inventive, just from a writerly point of view. I thought that was a really neat mutation that takes place in front of us as readers, that you would unfortunately lose if this were, in a, and I'm not suggesting don't make this a limited series. I'm not trying to be a Luddite or anything, but that was just a really cool effect, writerly effect that I liked very much. The other thing that as you were reading this scene, I kept thinking about this, and this may be my own just eccentricity or coming through here, but I kept thinking about that scene in Jaws when Matt Hooper goes to retrieve the tooth.
Oh, and the head.
Yes.
Yeah, Ben. I'm trying to remember the guy's name. Ben something,
Ben,
and his head comes falling out of the hole.
Was that that could just be my hallucinating here, but it occurred to me. I thought, wait a minute, this is the tooth that's then being dropped, and Hank is sort of the Ben head who's coming and terrifying the individual who's holding the tooth, and then they drop it. I don't. That could be so far from.
We've now seen into you, Patrick, in a way that we previously had not.
I don't know if that was in any corner of your dark
now that you say it, I see exactly what you're talking about. But yeah.
But Liz is going to say, I've never seen Jaws.
I haven't.
Oh my gosh.
I also like the fact that when Patrick is talking about that, and he goes, when she's holding the tooth, and I'm like, well, it's a baby tooth, man. So you really are thinking of a shark's tooth. You either that or she's a really big kid, because that tooth.
So we have Pinckney. We have a little more time, right?
Sure. Yeah. We can take as much time as we like. I just don't like people to feel that they're locked into a marathon where they have to fill time. But we have as much time, as folks want to take.
Maybe I'd like to hear maybe another excerpt, and then maybe you could,
I would too.
Chill. Yeah.
Can you read the fight?
Do you want people and Forth knocking the shit out of each other?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. This is also at the end of a chapter, but this is about 4/5 of the way through the novel. So there are a couple spoilers because, some people are dead and they get referenced. They are at a crime scene. The chief has just given the rundown about how things are going to go, how they're going to wrap things up. Piplo is displeased with how the case is wrapping up. He thinks it should stay open, that they don't have their guy. Forth thinks that the case should close, that everything is good. It's fine and dandy. So Chief Sheehorn lifted a hand in goodbye as he walked back to his Crown Vic. Climbing in and making a 3-point turn back west, Piplo wouldn't attempt with these deep ditches. Lieutenant Castellari pulled a set of keys from his slicker's pocket. I don't know about you, but I'm heading back. Can't fucking pay me enough to wade knee-deep through shit in the rain. He tossed his keys in the air and caught them, then passed through the space between Piplo and Forth. His SUV was parked on the other side of the bridge. The east end of Ridgewood was blocked off with a barricade, which Piplo supposed he could take down when he left today. No point in keeping it up. Folks were going to come gawk at Boy's place if they really wanted to, and there was nothing they needed kept out of if Chief Sheehorn was calling off the search. Piplo rolled a loose piece of chip seal under his shoe on the road. I'll handle Lowell's. Call and set up a meeting, he told Forth, whose eyes shot to him immediately. The hell you will. Excuse me? You'll have this case open another calendar year trying to prove Hank did it. Piplo glared. If Boy wasn't dead, you'd have Aaron Hunt locked up. You've been strutting around the last day like you figured this case out. No one on this road was even on your radar. Oh, and you liked Boy for this? Forth had that dangerous look to him again, the one that made Piplo keenly aware of their 6-inch height and 100-pound weight difference. Instead of being intimidated by it today, Piplo thought of David and Goliath and how satisfying it would be to knock Forth on his ass. Boys saw the same truck the Woomers did. Something's not right about that. Admit it. Just file our fucking paperwork, Mick. Put your name before mine. I don't give a shit, you squirrely ass fucking twig motherfucker. People didn't know why he did it, but he yanked his flashlight out of his belt and launched it at Forth's head. In retrospect, he could have shoved him, thrown a punch, kicked him in the knee. But the flashlight clattered across the road and Forth cupped a hand to his temple. When he pulled it away, the knot was already forming, split skin bleeding in the center of it. Piplo didn't have time to prepare before he got a shoulder to the sternum and was flying backward, falling. He reached out with his right hand and smacked it off something, and it lit up in blinding pain. His ass hit the bottom of the ditch, rainwater rushing up through his pants and boxers, and a shock of cold that made him gasp against his stalling lungs. He coughed and hacked and looked over. His palm was bleeding everywhere. He must have struck it off the culvert he now saw beside him that ran under Boy's driveway. He sunk his hand into the freezing ditch water for relief and stared up at Forth, 3 foot above him on the road. With his left hand, he fumbled under the water for his taser. He didn't know if it would work waterlogged, but he drew it out and pointed it at Forth's chest anyway. Forth laughed. When did you grow balls? He asked. You want to talk to the lulz? Fine. Go ahead.
What I want to say about this is like the dialogue. I feel like the dialogue is also very cinematic, and it communicates as much about the environment as your descriptions of setting do, right? Because the dialogue is very in situ. The dialogue tells us not only about the characters, but their surroundings, right? Where they're from, who they are. And I think that my question I want to ask about that is, where did you kind of sort of acquire this ear for dialogue, or how did you learn to write dialogue, right? Like I'm curious, if this is something that is, you kind of grew up listening to certain like cadences and certain like, diction and speech. Is this something you acquired, in your MFA program where you were thinking more about this and kind of overhearing conversations in Southern Illinois? I'm curious to hear about the origin of that.
Kind of a complex answer. I have done a lot of work on dialogue. It's one of the things I focused on a lot over the course of my career, is I wanted to make sure that I write really good dialogue. I try to write dialogue better than I write prose in some cases to make sure that it's very seamless. And in a lot of cases, I did musical theater. I forced myself to say every piece of dialogue I write out loud. There is not a piece of dialogue I have ever written that I have not said. So if the cadence doesn't feel right coming out of my mouth, I fix it, I change it, I tweak it, I put in dashes in different places, periods in different spots. So it has to feel natural to me before I'll ever assign it to a character in any way. And if I find reciting it that I've accidentally left out a word, or I've put a word in a different spot, I'll go in and I'll change it because that was natural to me and what I wrote wasn't. But the way that they speak, like I grew up, like this is the way that people talk, like around where I'm from. And I picked up on it, and I try to make everybody speak in a very distinct way, because especially when I'm back home and I'm listening to people, I love encountering people who speak in a very distinct way. Those people who censor out like all of their curse words, and they say like dad gum and all of that stuff. And it's like, I like the way that you talk. It's so distinct. So then I'll just go assign it to a character. And it's like, you're going to speak like this guy that I just met in the grocery store. You're going to talk like this guy. So like, I love listening to the way that people talk, and I steal it and then I give it to a character. So dialogue is something that I absolutely like heavily pay attention to, and I try to work on.
I love that. I love that you say every line of dialogue too, right? That it's almost like, it's like, dramaturgical, like you're just kind of like, this is like a play,
Yep.
Like I like that a lot. This is a screenplay. Yeah.
I sound very demented when they're having arguments with each other, though, just in my living room, shouting at myself. And imagine when it's not right yet, so I'm just doing it over and over and over. God knows what my upstairs neighbor thinks of me.
There were two kind of character motivations that I wanted to ask about.
Mhm.
One is Todd,
Mhm.
and I don't know how other people felt about this, but his killing of Taryn was a little bit of a, it was a little hard for me to imagine. Not because it's implausible, but I think there's a sort of psychology there that you might probe into a little bit more. You get into it with, I guess it's a kind of psychology that is there. Well, here, let me ask this question: is there a sort of misogyny in his the murder? Is there a kind of underlying misogyny in Todd's killing of Taryn in terms of her constantly um, impugning his masculinity? We hear a little bit of that. In your mind, is that a component of it? And then the other question I have is just about the character of Dale. Could you tell me a little bit in your mind about Dale's kind of a Dale origin story, or where does Dale's cruelty come from? Do you think as his creator? So those two questions, answer them in whatever order you wish.
Okay, so Todd, I think the reason that Todd kills Taryn is that he's terrified of Taryn. And I think that really comes to light for him. Like, he's terrified of the things that she does throughout the novel, and that she doesn't care about anything. He's very concerned about not getting caught and about not getting attacked by the Woomers the entire time. Be very careful about his actions, and not having to face the consequences of anything that he did. Taryn doesn't care. She just wants to watch the world burn. She does not care about anything. And in Baby Killers, which is probably hands down my favorite chapter in the entire novel, whenever she tries to shoot him with a shotgun and then speeds through the rain in the truck with him, he realizes that this girl is going to get me killed. She will stop at nothing to get me killed. She doesn't care. So I think that in that moment, he just really realizes like what a destructive, dangerous force that his sister is, and that if this chance to get him killed or to get him attacked by their neighbors or to get him turned into the police wasn't going to work, then the next one might, or the next one might, because there's going to be a next time with her. There's always a next time with her.
Okay, so because for me, his caution worked against what you're saying there. The fact that he is so worried about consequences, that would make him not. I mean, you could take that in two ways. He's so terrified of consequences that he kills Taryn, or he's so terrified of consequences that he's just obsessed with appeasing her, which he is, and that he's so afraid of the consequences that would make him too terrified ever to think about killing her, or ever to follow through with that. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think Todd is a very complicated character to me, in that it's a constant war for him between what he should do and what he shouldn't do and what he's scared of. And he wants his sister, but he's scared of his sister. So he isn't quite sure what he wants as a character until like he fucks up irreversibly and realizes that he has left nothing in his wake for him to return to. He has destroyed his life completely, and there's nothing that he can go back to. There's nothing that he can fix. That he never hitched his horse to anything specifically throughout the novel, and that is ultimately like what his downfall is. That if he had decided, I'm gonna do this thing, or I'm gonna do this, or if he had picked like a motivation or something that he was more scared of than something else, I don't think that he would have had the conclusion that he did in the novel. I think that it's his indecisiveness that led to him dying. Spoiler alert for everybody.
And then the Dale question.
The Dale question is particularly interesting. So this novel grew out of a short story that grew out of a piece of flash fiction. So it's like made its way up in word count, and it's changed. But whenever it was a short story, it was about 8,000 words. Dale was a character in that short story, but he was only off screen. He never appeared in that short story. And it was just very much about dealing, and it wasn't a murder mystery. It's just about dealing with Hank and picking up Hank's body. Teddy picking up Hank's body. Hank had killed his girl, and that was a known fact. But I had made a mistake whenever I wrote the short story. Whenever Teddy cracked open the gun in the short story, there were no shells in the gun, which I kept in the novel. But everyone in the workshop pointed out to me, it's really suspicious that there are no shotgun shells in your short story in the gun. Are you sure that his brother didn't have anything to do with it? And I'm like, now wait a damn minute. I think you guys are onto something. So I actually took my fuck up that they ran off with, and I made an entire novel out of it. So
That's a
what I
winning
did.
strategy. So I could not be prouder in this moment.
That's exactly what I did. So in his original inception, he was an off-screen character that had nothing to do with anything at all. And then the workshop pointed out this really cool like plot thread to me. And I was like, you know what? He could be this villainous character throughout the story. And I had a lot of fun writing Dale as being this kind of quiet villain. Him and Taryn to me were some of the most fun people to write because they are ultimately like the masterminds of everything that happens. They are like the two driving forces of like why Anna is dead. But Taryn doesn't care what happens. One of the reasons she can't be a point of view character is because she would not hide anything from you. She would tell you like the first sentence of the first page of her first chapter that like what happened. Dale is a like mastermind and a master manipulator, and I love that for him. But whenever I was building his character, I just started realizing I'm like, you have this guy who has this brother who is a constant fuck up, is his older brother, and he's constantly forced to take care of his older brother, to lie to the police, to cover for him, to probably house him at points, and to drag him out of whatever drug-induced comas that he's put himself into. The cops are probably at their house all of the time. Then he gets himself put in prison, and suddenly I have to take over the family farm. Maybe I didn't even want to do that. I have a wife who's a bitch who nags me all of the time. I have kids that I never pay attention to, and my brother is back in my life, and I have to take care of him again, and I have to take care of everything that's going on. I am just fed up with all of this bullshit. So to me, he is somebody who is dangerous because he is just constantly like forcing himself to push all of this stuff down, and he's like a pressure cooker that it was just waiting for a moment to blow with him.
That's interesting. I guess I was thinking that there was. I'm trying to get to the source of his cruelty, of Dale's cruelty, and because the description of what he does to Anna is so horrific.
Yeah.
That was really, it was disturbing to read, and especially where she curls up on herself. That was maybe the saddest line for me in the entire novel. And for him still to 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 be kicking her and stomping her, what I wanted a greater. It just seemed so evil to me. And what you're describing sounds in some ways logical. Like, oh, it's pent up. He's a pressure cooker. And I don't know if that would lead to the sort of masochistic, just absolutely deplorable actions he takes against Anna, because to my mind, there's something unhinged there. There's almost an irrationality to that cruelty and the evil of Dale in that moment, that the very logical explanation you just gave, it could account for, let's say, getting rid of the body, doing kind of a cleanup duty. But what he does when he's just, stomping on her, it's just it's so awful that's why I was looking for some source of his cruelty that wasn't based in the sort of logical or rational explanation that you just gave. Which again, I don't mean that to sound like, a real criticism. It's just that's what I was imagining in my own reading of the novel.
To me, Dale is somebody who could have gone his entire life without ever hurting somebody, ever. If the situation never presented itself, he never would have done it. He never would have gone out and found somebody or anything. He never would have abducted anybody. Had this situation not been directly in front of him, he never would have done anything. He would have gone his entire life just dealing with whatever people put on his shoulders. But this is directly in front of him, and there is absolutely nothing that he can do about the situation, because if he calls the cops, like, his entire life is over at this point. There's the little girl tied up on his property who has already been hurt at this point. And are they really going to believe him, who is housing an ex-con in his house? I mean, it's gonna like ruin his entire life and his reputation in the community. And all he can see in that moment is just his life changing and his life falling apart. And it falls apart for him. So, yeah, I want to do some more work with Dale. Absolutely. I do want to spend some more time with his past, because I talked about, cutting background details with Pips and with Billy. There were more background details about Hank and Dale's like home life whenever they were teenagers and they're growing up. So I could see about working some of that stuff back in, because I think it gives a lot of context for who Dale is as a person.
Well, I'm all questioned out. I have no more questions or comments. I don't know what you all are thinking.
I think it's fair to say that we have done due diligence.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel eminently satisfied but Patrick,
I have two very quick questions.
no rush.
Couldn't they at least adopt the cat at the end? Something nice.
Would it make you happy to know that Shep is with Lacey? I just forgot to put it in the novel. Lacey's living with her grandmother. It's a detail that didn't get carried over between drafts.
Okay.
That's what I was going to ask too, where Lacey is. So okay, so
Lacey is living with her grandmother, and she is living happily with Shep forever and ever. Her and her 1-year
on a
cat.
wheat field in Kansas.
What I think would happen is for Pips and Billy to adopt the cat, because it's just right there. And I thought that would be such
forget to feed that cat. She would never be home, and Billy wouldn't care. So it would not be a good environment for that cat.
But it's kind of an outdoor cat, so it would sort of fend for itself, but it would come in periodically. Anyway.
McGrath really just wants an entire novel of Pips and Billy owning a cat.
Yeah, Pips and Billy and the cat.
120.
That's the sequel.
Isn't that?
Yeah, and it's going to be 120,000 words.
That's all I want. Can't you? I mean, I don't know why that's so unreasonable. Just
well, the real discovery of this defense for me has been Patrick. I think Patrick has to be on all future fiction defenses. Well, so what I would say, we've had the question and answer period. I found it eminently satisfactory and enjoyable. We've heard readings, we've seen the videos. So let's turn away for sort of as our conclusion for a moment, away from the thesis itself, and turn more toward your experience as an MFA student, but also your experience as an undergraduate here. Just as a person with considerable experience in this place, with this program, with these faculty. Can you talk a little bit, as much or as little as you like, about what has changed in you, right? Where were you when you arrived, as opposed to where are you now? And I know that's a big question covering a lot of years, but if you can give us kind of a synopsis, right? Like what did the taxpayers of Illinois get for their for their money, right? The money they lavished on you over your years as a graduate assistant. And then, kind of tell us like what can we change? What do we retain? What should be our goals? That kind of thing, just because you're, like I say, a lot about the program. So, help us, your expertise can be really helpful to us, I think.
So my personal journey, kind of as a writer here over the course of 7 years, has been a little bit of a circular one, but I don't mean that in a bad way in any way. I think there are a lot of really great things about undergraduates. And one of the things that I loved most about being an undergraduate is just the fearless way that they write things. Like they will just write stuff and throw it out into a workshop. And if you don't like it, then fine, they'll take the punch and they'll get back up and they'll give you something else. They don't care. And they write the wildest stuff. As long as it makes them happy, they'll give it to you. So I really admired that about undergraduates, and I really loved that quality in myself when I was an undergraduate. And then I hit grad school. And there's this weird expectation with grad school that like it needs to be something extremely serious and you need to take it very seriously. And it always reminds me of a story that I think I read it on Facebook or something. It's the one about the teacher in like the pottery class who splits the class down the middle, and he says, half the class I'm going to grade you on like the quantity of stuff you produce, and the other half of the class I'm going to grade you on the quality of stuff that you produce. And when he gets to the end of everything, it turns out that the half of the class that's graded on quantity produced the better than the side of the class graded on quality, because they were making stuff and it didn't work, and so they were making something else, and through trial and error they were getting better and better and better.
Yep.
Whereas the other side was just theorizing about what the perfect pot looked like the entire time, and we're never fucking making anything. And that to me is the difference between like undergrad and grad school. Is you hit grad school and it's let's theorize about like how to make the perfect thing, and let's not actually write and do trial and error. Let's not fail fast, to put it in your terms. So grad school is like trying to get back to who I was in undergrad, of being this person who was just writing stuff that didn't work and then trying to write something that did, and getting better and better and better, and not being afraid to just throw stuff out in workshop. And if people didn't like it, fine, back to the drawing board. I'll write something else. I'm not going to get precious with it. I just want to be better. So it's circular in that way. But I think like I have absolutely gotten better as a writer in 7 years, like 100%. My writing has gotten better. McGrath, you pointed it out, the evolution of the tooth, like how it morphs into different things. One thing that I became indicative of my writing is an extremely close third. That's just something that I didn't really have 7 years ago that I have now, is this extremely close third point of view, where people see things as they are, and they move and adapt and they change. And the prose is how the people think with only their vocabulary. And there's so many M dashes in my writing. I write like I'm getting paid by the M dash. I don't know when that started, but it's not stopping anytime soon. As for the program itself, it's changed a lot since I've been here. When I got here, it was, that standard, we're going to sit in a workshop, bring your manuscript, we're going to talk about your manuscript, and then, we're going to talk about somebody else's manuscript, like the next class, the next week. And it was such a closed off process. Like there were so many walls of you're not collaborating with other writers, and your writing isn't touching anybody else's writing. It's like your food groups aren't touching. Like you do your stuff and then you put it on a shelf, and then you come back and you do another thing. And as we started getting into more digital stuff in grad school, we were collaborating with our fellow writers. We were working on group projects, and we were doing podcasting and games together. And we were writing anthologies where we shared worlds and things together. And not only that, but the things we were interested in creatively no longer had to be separated. My interest in videos didn't have to be divorced from my interest in writing anymore. I could merge those two things together. So being in the program and seeing kind of that evolution like into digital media, like a lot of walls have come down in this program in a way that I really liked, and that's what I want to see going forward, is just walls coming down, more collaboration, mixing up of people's writings, chances to write together, chances to mix the things that you love creatively together, because I wrote a novel that is very cinematic, and it would not have happened if I wasn't allowed to think about my novel, my prose in cinematic terms. So it's very beneficial, and I love that.
Well, excellent. Thank you. I'm really glad to hear. I mean, because you're the sort of person we hope to have here, and hope to, and you're leaving here having accomplished what we hope our folks will accomplish. So that's a very useful synopsis of your time here, and it really has changed. I mean, you've been here about half the time that I've been here, and we were very much what we were when you arrived, for the whole time before, but the change in the last few years, and with RA's arrival, I mean, it's really been a time of phenomenal change. And the worry is that you leave stuff behind, right? That you shouldn't. But all right. Well, thank you very much. I've thoroughly enjoyed this defense. Typically, if we were in a physical environment, we would send you out of the room now, and we would pretend to discuss whether we were going to approve your thesis or not. But I'm going to put my colleagues on the spot right now and say, may I send you the forms for your signature and approval for Liz's thesis? Okay, great. So just look for those PDFs in your inbox. I'm not always ideal at getting them in a form you can sign. So if there's any problem, just send them back to me, get them to Netsley, whatever, but we will get that taken care of. But thank you both for your time and for your care in doing this process. And Liz, congratulations, well done. Simply, you're top of the heap in my books. It was really. I am sorry that you're graduating, but let's keep working together. Let's talk about let's talk about stuff like the pitch deck and those sorts of things, because you're part of the family.
Absolutely.
Great. All right. Well, thank you all very much. Thank you, folks who have been watching on the NSN network on Twitch television. This has been the thesis defense of Lizabeth Engelmeier. Look for the book Nobody Girl between hardcovers and on your Kindle sometime soon. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Congratulations, Liz.
Yay, Liz.